Good evening and thank you for joining us for this evening's discussion. I'm your host, Nicole Hayles. Tonight we will continue to analyze the findings with pollster and Chief Executive Officer of Johnson Survey Research Limited, Bill Johnson. As we look at the direction in which the country is going, the most pressing national problems the Jamaican people believe the country is facing, and what are the most important local issues. Also joining in this evening's discussion is former General Secretary of the People's National Party, Paul Burke. Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for joining me.
Good evening.
In an article in 2019, President of Jamaica Promotions Corporation, JAMPRO, Diane Edwards, says the country is moving in the right direction and is on a trajectory to achieve its Vision 2030 target of being the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Jamaica was then listed as a top-performing country within the Caribbean. Fast forward to 2020, do you think the country is going in the right direction? Mr. Johnson, what do the Jamaican people have to say about this?
Okay, well, 40% of the people say the country's going in the right direction these days. 34% say it's going in the wrong direction, and 26% don't know. Now, it's interesting, you mentioned 2019. We did a survey almost a year ago, and that showed 30% said the country was going in the right direction. 46% said it was going in the wrong direction, and 24% didn't know. So things have obviously changed dramatically since then. There are also significant differences on the basis of gender. 45% of the men say the country's going in the right direction. 38% of men say the country's going in the wrong direction. 36% of the women say the country's going in the right direction. 35% of the women say the country is going in the wrong direction. Not surprisingly, those who voted for the JLP, 57-17, they think the country's going in the right direction. However, it's interesting, those who voted for the PNP in 2016, 23%, almost a quarter, think the country's going in the right direction these days. 52% say it's going in the wrong direction. And finally, of those who didn't vote in 2016, 40% say the country's going in the right direction, and 35% say it's going in the wrong direction. Now, these numbers, this right direction, wrong direction, is often a leading indicator in terms of the voting population's overall views in terms of the incumbent government. So at this point, these numbers would appear to be very positive for the government. Let me just add one other thing. I've been polling in Jamaica for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of polls I've done when the incumbent government was rated in terms of going in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction.
Mr. Burke, you've heard those numbers. The numbers are indicating that it's going well for the government. And based on what Mr. Johnson just said, a quarter of the persons who voted PNP in the last election gave the government a favorability rating. Your thoughts on this?
Well, let me start by saying again, I find the results quite credible. I believe that in a period when many Jamaicans were panicking, we were in uncharted waters with the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly a great level of uncertainty. The government did extremely well with their public relations. They took their most popular ministers, the Prime Minister, Minister of Health, Chris Tufton, and Local Government Minister, Desmond McKenzie, had them speaking on prime time television every night, reassuring the Jamaican people. The social media capacity of the government, right, its whole infrastructure was put at work. And I think people wanted to hear from the government, and that whole PR job did well. I will follow the women. More women don't feel that the country is going in the right direction. And I tell you, women have a better instinct than seeing just the short term. Men more look to the short term. Women think more medium term and long term. Even when they think about personal relationships, personal relationships. So I am not surprised. I am not alarmed. I am not worried about it, but it is something that you have to take into account. It is a high figure for an incumbent government, and it is a plus in their favor.
All right, so in spite of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, crime has been a major national problem, among other issues. It therefore brings us to our next question. What are the most important local issues and the most pressing national problems the Jamaican people believe the country is facing right now? What are those, Mr. Johnson, based on the findings of the poll?
Okay, well, 70% say that crime and violence is one of the most important issues. 67% mention unemployment or jobs, 45% COVID-19, community development 22%, the overall cost of living 20%, water issues of one kind or another 18%, road conditions 12%, and healthcare 10%. So they basically fit into three levels: crime and jobs up at the top, COVID-19 sort of in the middle, and then the bottom five: development, cost of living, water issues, road conditions, and healthcare. Now, these vary somewhat on the basis of the individual constituency, of course, but overall, I think they give a fairly good picture of the country at large at this time.
Mr. Burke, crime continues to be a recurring issue for the Jamaican people. There's been a lot of criticism of the zones of special operations that are being used as a short-term measure to curtail the crime problem. Just this week, it was announced that another zone of special operation has been declared Greenwich Town, correction. What's your position on that? The government is yet to announce a crime strategy, a crime plan to the Jamaican people.
So let me go back, and I don't want to politicize crime because it's really a national problem, and no government has really made any major reduction in violent crimes. Although under the last PNP administration, it was going down. You would recall leader of the opposition, Andrew Holness, saying that every time you vote a PNP government in power, crime goes up, and that you'll be able to sleep with your doors open and windows open if you elected a GLP government. He has still not apologized for that statement. But the fact is that COVID actually helped the security forces in reducing crime in its first couple of months. People had to obey a curfew, and people's minds were fixed to the COVID issue. The stats I saw last weekend were 21 people were murdered. And I get no pleasure in saying that because it is lives lost. So I don't get pleasure. I would want to see crime go down, even though it would be a plus for the government. The government has failed, and it is just there. But it's not just the government alone has failed. The society has failed, but the government has to take responsibility. We were told by the commissioner that they were dismantling gangs and that we would see a reduction in criminal activity. We had 600 murders about 2 weeks ago, a 3% reduction. And I attribute that only to the COVID-19 pandemic. The government has failed to deal with it. And therefore, and again I say, as someone who went to Parliament and openly supported the ZOSA concept, they have failed to use it effectively, right? They said this was their prescription to deal with crime. They rushed it through Parliament. The PNP had to beg for some further consultation. The PNP finally agreed with it with the amendments. It has failed. And the crime plan has failed, if there's a plan. As I said, I get no pleasure in making the comment. I would really want to see crime go down, and I could say, well, one good thing about this government. They have effectively reduced crime, and we have effectively saved Jamaican lives. The fact is they have failed miserably.
Still with you, Mr. Burke. One of the national issues as it relates to the findings of the poll is the cost of living. We can't dismiss that. While the numbers of the last survey of living conditions indicated that 12.6%, that's the poverty rate, it's the lowest in 10 years. On the books, that's significant. But the reality of the common persons, it's far different from what it's stated on the paper as it pertains to their reality. As it pertains to the local issues that Mr. Johnson mentioned in his poll, issues such as jobs, development, water issues, roads, those continue to be pressing issues for persons. What are your thoughts on those?
I am not going to cast any doubt about the integrity of statin, but I'm a little bit confused because a couple months ago I heard that poverty was actually going up. And then all of a sudden, I heard that poverty is going down. I have not looked at the figures. I don't understand it. I looked at a map which just, map done by the PIOJ, which just did not make sense to me with the whole poverty issue, right? I don't know how the survey is done, but this is not something I have said recently under JLP administration. Maybe I just don't understand it, but I think some of these surveys are really skewed. What surprises me of the results, and I know when I say COVID-19 concern being high, and I see healthcare being at 10%. I don't know if Bill could explain if people separated them and how they separated it, because I would want to think that in this period, healthcare would have come up higher, but people probably combine it with their concern. COVID-19 is 45%, and healthcare is the lowest concern at 10%. And I'd be interested to hear Bill explain that for me.
Yeah,
Mr.
I think
Johnson,
I tend to agree with you, Paul. We probably could have netted the 45% for COVID and 10% for healthcare. I think some people just mentioned COVID-19. Other people might have mentioned COVID-19 and along with healthcare. But I was surprised as well as you that healthcare individually wasn't mentioned more. I just think that people are concentrating so much on COVID-19 that, I mean, healthcare was, we asked people to name the 2 or 3 most important issues to them. So if somebody mentioned jobs, somebody mentioned crime, somebody mentioned COVID, they really don't have room for anything else. So
Bill, another question.
I think it's fair, though, to certainly combine the healthcare and the COVID numbers together and have over half the people concerned, certainly about healthcare in one form or another. And the other thing, do people group corruption in the crime statistics, or crime to their mind is the violence, or do they think that corruption is just endemic to Jamaica? No, well, corruption came up approximately 5 to 6% of the people mentioned corruption in one form or another, and that was just corruption. It wasn't large enough to make it into the top 8. So as I say, I think it was 5% actually who mentioned corruption as one of the major national issues or local issues.
Mr. Johnson, so that people understand how polls are conducted, can you just break down in simple terms for our viewers how you go about ascertaining your poll and how you come about getting the findings?
Okay, well, we select 84 different communities across the country on a purely statistical basis based on the number of people who are registered to vote. And by a fancy statistical formula, we come up with 84 communities. We personally develop routes so that our interviewers can go out and interview in these communities. In this case, we interviewed approximately 15 people in each of these 84 communities. And they're from one end of the country to the other. We start with the election returns and in terms of the base for our numbers, in terms of numbers of registered voters, and go from there. We then send out interviewing teams of 4 people with a supervisor. And as I say, they have a quota of interviewing usually 12 to 15 people in each one of these 84 communities. Obviously, it's done purely statistically. Our people are careful; they don't wear orange or they don't wear green to give any indication in terms of who is sponsoring the survey. In this case, Jamaicans are inquisitive. They often say, "Well, who is sponsoring this?" And we said, "Mello TV is sponsoring it." The results are then checked personally by me. They're then sent and entered into the computer, and then I analyze them and send them on to the client, in this case, Mello TV.
What was the time frame within which these polls were done?
This was done from June 13th to June 20th. Basically, it was Saturday and Sunday, and then the following Saturday. We prefer interviewing on the weekends. If you interview during the week, you tend to undersample people who have regular jobs, and you just get a bunch of old people like myself or unemployed people who would be home to answer the surveys. Most of our surveys are done door to door, or we interview people on their porches or in their neighborhoods. So we get a much better, much richer sample, broader sample if we interview on the weekends than if we interview during the week. I'm giving away all my secrets.
Okay.
Sorry, so may I make a comment? I
Certainly.
think the time of the interview was a good time, favorable to the government. We were announcing the reopening of our ports, the reopening of the economy, Jamaicans being allowed to return home after people had gone through. It's like you starve yourself for a couple of months and then you see food in front of you. It's a good feeling. The time when the poll was done was a good feeling in the country, that we were about to see the curfew hours had been relaxed. We were about to see Jamaicans return home. We were about to see the economy start reopening. So people were much more comfortable about Jamaica at that time. And that goes to the government's benefit. So it was a good time to do a poll. And I'm not surprised as a result, because as I heard those announcements being made, I also felt better about Jamaica. I felt better that people were able to go back to their jobs. I felt better that the many people called me from abroad about when they would be able to get back into Jamaica easily and seamlessly was being resolved. It was a good period to do a poll, and I think the government benefited tremendously.
Yeah, I would
And
just say
on that note, we'll leave it for this
and all of
evening.
us know that Jamaicans tend to be very fickle. And as you say, that was perhaps a good time. It was purely by chance. I mean, the poll was commissioned several weeks before, but there'll be other polls that will be a chance to see, how things have changed, if at all. But I certainly wouldn't be breaking out the bottles of champagne and celebrating at this point if I were the government.
Thank you very much, and we'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, gentlemen. With me this evening was pollster Bill Johnson and former General Secretary of the People's National Party, Mr. Paul Burke. Join us on Monday when we will discuss the favorability and unfavorable ratings of Andrew Holness and Peter Phillips. Join me then. I'm your host for this evening, Nicole Hayles.